All right, so today we have Jackie Brosamer, head of AI and data platform, and Brad Axen, tech lead for AI and data platform for Block, which used to be called Square. And the website, obviously, for you guys is block.xyz. And we're here to talk about an interesting open source project called codename Goose. Tagline is your local AI agent automating engineering tasks seamlessly. Also on their GitHub repo, your on-machine AI agent capable of automating complex tasks from start to finish. And with that long introduction, welcome to the podcast, Jackie and Brad.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
And
excited.
yeah. So I was telling you before the podcast, I had not heard of codename Goose. But the more I read about it, the more intrigued I am. So, and after this, I will try it. But I guess the very basic thing for our listeners is what's the license?
Yeah, this is a fully open project.
Okay.
We have an MIT license, so definitely free to use and to fork and create from. Take it wherever you want to take it.
So for most of what we'll talk about does it apply to that open source version, or is there a very separate, unique version that you folks use at Block?
We use the open source version internally, but there are certain integrations and authentications that we obviously have to keep, not open source because of the way our corporate security is set up. But we're very much trying to dog food, what we're doing every day and use it and make sure that we bring those improvements back to the community.
And how old is the project?
We released this in January this year,
Okay.
the open source version, or had a wide release, but we've been building it and kind of thinking on the ideas for about 9 months now.
All right. So I guess first question. So what problem in your workflow prompted you to build yet another cloud copilot?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you the beginning of it, which is we I think like everyone else realized around 9 months ago that these were very useful for developers. Like it was a great tool to use to build code with. And that got better and better as new model releases came out. So it kind of worked. It turned from like an interesting experiment into something we actually used to do our jobs. From there, the thing that I think made us want to put it into the open source community was we realized that there were so many other capabilities that this thing could operate for you beyond just a developer workflow. It can go do all these things for our design teams or our support agents and a lot of different task automation that would just come from the fact that these agents are so these LLMs are so general purpose that an agent with the right tools can do all kinds of things.
So at this point, pretty much any software engineer at Block, or I guess not any, but many software engineers at Block use codename Goose.
Yes. We have about 5,000 people using it at Block per week.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So, like I said, I haven't used it, but based on the description, it heavily ties itself to the Model Context Protocol, MCP. So then, without MCP, this project does not exist.
This project actually predated MCP, but definitely something that we foresaw a need for. And we wanted to jump really quickly when we saw that become released, because one of the really powerful things about an open source agent like this is not only can you integrate with, any model, whether you want to use an Anthropic model or an open source model or an OpenAI model, but you can also integrate with a wide array of different data sources through MCP that allows you to do things like, take a bunch of information from your Google Calendar and, do something with it in Slack in a way that can be a little bit challenging with some of these tools that are more embedded with a particular interface.
Yeah, it seems like the most important word actually in MCP is the context. Because basically, that's what a lot of these agents and models lack, right? So the more context you provide them, and actually, the more context you provide them, you may not even have to fine tune these models, right?
Yeah, and I think like that's something that is a little bit different about this project is that most of the other ones I see in the space, they have an initial goal that's not driven by what it's connected to. It's like it's going to do like local development, or it's going to be something specific in like Google Workspace. With Goose, it's really a blank slate until you've connected it to the tools it's going to pilot. So that means that it can be a very different agent for different people depending on what they connect to. And that was something we saw pretty early on. So when we were like developing the first version, this was before the protocol came out. We had this same idea, but we're doing something a little bit different, and then got in touch with Anthropic and heard that they were working on a protocol. And so we jumped in there, kind of helped get a couple of additions into the protocol, and then rewrote our code base before the release to use that so that we would have this system that was based on the capabilities you bring to it instead of the capabilities we thought it should do for you.
And so, Jackie, since you manage a lot of these engineers, I'm sure a lot of them are probably bugging you. Hey, this is great, but I want to use this other tool, whatever, name your favorite, bring your own coding assistant. Is that still happening inside Block? Are they still allowed to use some of these third-party, possibly even proprietary coding assistants?
Yeah, we have a pretty liberal policy in terms of like what engineers are allowed to use at Block. We try to, of course, balance like not having 1,000 AI tools with, making sure that people have the ability to kind of experiment at the cutting edge. And so that one of the really interesting things I think we've seen is that different tools are good fits for different engineering problems, right? And so we've seen some particular code bases that are really complex not be as easy of a fit for some of these like really general purpose agents, but have been like better fits for, things that do more close to autocomplete, something like Cursor. But then we've seen other tasks around, doing vuln fixes, around, dealing with smaller code bases that are a really good fit for this agent. And I think one of the really interesting things that we're seeing is just that exploration and that learning as people use these tools hands-on and figure out what is the right shape of a code base for a different tool. Because there's really no standard practices out there right now. And I think that's the exciting part of being an engineer in 2025 is kind of getting to invent that for yourself and learn with everybody else.
So, Brad, when someone new joins Block, how do you folks onboard them to codename Goose? So, in other words, to start kind of a very narrow kind of introduction. Here's a pull request.
Right. Yeah.
And proceed. Yeah.
So we do this is one of the things that we just auto install for people. So anybody who starts out at the company is going to have this on their computer. And really early on, we tell people to just get familiar with chat. Honestly, if the agent's not using tools, it's still the same as any other chat interface, and that helps people understand what does it know about, what context does it have about the company, and from there, I think it pretty naturally emerges because Goose along the way will tell you what tools it has and what tools it can enable for you. So if you're having a conversation, you're talking about a code base you want to contribute to, it'll say okay, do you want me to go ahead and try to make those changes? And so that way we kind of see this dynamic evolving where more and more we're trying to make a project like Goose walk you into the capabilities it has and show you what it can do and even prompt you into what you should be using it for.
So if I go into Block right now, basically everyone is vibe coding, Jackie?
I think, some people are vibe coding, some people are vibe writing, some people are, vibe managing. I think one of the really interesting things that we're seeing as people kind of develop this muscle is really a lot more rigor than I've seen before around where is it a good idea to do something quick and dirty, and where do I really need to think about where to build from scale? And that's again across all of those different avenues. Not only where do I need to think about a hacky prototype versus a distributed system when I'm building, some engineering tasks, but also, at me as a manager, where do I want to spend a lot of time really handcrafting something versus where do I want to, do something that's more of a quick outline. And that's, I think, been a really interesting question that I haven't thought about in terms of as deeply in terms of a lot of different aspects of my job. Is just what is that level of rigor that we need for each of these tasks?
Brad, years ago, of course, when you join a team, you get mentored by someone, you learn coding conventions and coding practices in that team. Can you bypass that now and just vibe learn all of that through Code Goose, because Code Goose knows everything about the code base at Block, right? So it
Right.
knows how you folks already do things, right? So
That's actually kind of a tough question because I do think it is changing. Like I don't think you need to take a team member's time to figure out where the things are in the code base anymore or how you're going to contribute your first PR. I think more that same dynamic of mentorship applies to how you scale and how you like solve more high level problems with the same tools. So definitely still that like need for the team to bring you along to what the goals are, but much less in the details and much more about how you solve like big picture problems.
So, of course, one of the things that's nice about this project is you get to bring your own model, and that seems to be because I mean, I think people prefer different models for different things, right? So, um, and so, are you guys comfortable sharing what's the kind of percentage breakdown of model preference?
Yeah, I don't know that I have exact numbers, but I can definitely tell
Yeah,
you.
just even a kind of a rank.
Yeah. So one thing that is really cool that we see people doing, and this is in a kind of emergent behavior, is that people will switch in the middle of a conversation, which is really interesting. So it's like not even that you'll pick one and stick with it for a month. You will literally like realize soon that, oh, the reasoner models are better at making a plan and a design with me. And then something like Sonnet is the best at actually executing the
But then
tools.
will it, as I'm debugging this thing, Brad, and I switch models in the middle, it'll know the history.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's literally just continuing the conversation with a new model. And so, just to give you a quick answer, I think definitely true that it's the frontier models that everyone wants to use right now. So whatever is the latest is what people gravitate towards. We just are trying to use the most capable models. And that tends to be the Sonnet family from Anthropic and then the reasoners from OpenAI. Those are the ones that get the most use right now.
What about Gemini?
So Gemini is very cool. And actually the 2.5 Pro with the 1 million context window has like a really neat niche where it's just like, oh, I have a lot of content to go through. And this is kind of the only thing that's handling it today. So that does come up. But I think that the proactiveness of the Sonnet family makes most people prefer it at the moment, like just because it will you don't have to keep encouraging it to do the work. It will just go and run with it and you can come back half an hour later and see what happened.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that's happening is because to some extent we're reliant on these frontier models to do coding. It seems like now we need the cloud to do any coding, right? So before you could do a little bit on your laptop, but now you can imagine someone opening their laptop in the morning, has a Jira ticket, and then points it to Claude Code using Code Goose, and Claude Code just brute forces the hell out of this problem and resolves it, right?
I
Uh,
um I was on a plane recently, and so
yeah.
it was didn't have a good enough Wi-Fi to run these models, and yeah, I had exactly that experience. It did not feel good actually. I felt very rusty and a little bit embarrassed how hard it was to code by hand.
And so then Jackie, so what do you think are some of the lessons from Codename Goose in terms of building agents? So would you consider Codename Goose an agent? What is an agent anyway?
Yeah, well, I think everybody has a slightly different definition of what an agent is. So, really good question. When we think about it, what we think about is really like this loop that allows the model to retry and like bring in new context and kind of self-correct, right? And so that's what we kind of started with when Goose was just this big. It was really just this loop, and everything else I think that we've added on top of it has been making that loop better, making the summarization, of a really long context window improve, thinking about how we can be bringing in the right context, but not the wrong context. How can we optimize tool selection? That's kind of all been expanded off of this fundamental loop. And one of, the interesting things we've also started to see is, to the question about models earlier, is we are starting to see people, especially in the open source community, who are starting to see good results and experiment with using Goose with local models through Olama. Even though it doesn't necessarily solve a lot of our enterprise coding at scale problems, we're seeing a lot of hobbyists really have a lot of success with configuring that. And we're getting pretty close to the point where you can start to do really useful things with a model that you can just run on your laptop.
So, Brad, the choice of MCP, I guess, is reasonable, but recently I've been seeing more and more kind of critiques of MCP. I don't know if you've been reading some of these things, right? So, and I think part of it is just that it's early. A lot of these things have to be worked out. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the early days of the social web when there were so many battles around protocols and W3C kind of meetings. And at some point, one of the protocols just becomes some sort of empirical standard where everyone is using it. And so therefore, we don't have to go through the W3C. It's just the standard, right? So
Right.
what's your sense of MCP? Is it going that direction? Because right now it's basically a spec designed by one company with, it's not a industry-wide kind of thing, right? And then as I mentioned, there's critiques of it, right? So
Yeah.
how do you think this is going to play out?
I think that the like this protocol is so valuable because of the need it fills. And with any protocol, the thing that makes it succeed or fail is how many people adopt it, right? Because you need both sides of the protocol for this to be interesting. And I think it has hit a critical mass where it's going to be more about evolving the protocol than it is going to be about competing with the protocol. And I'm really happy about that personally. Like, I think that's just better for everyone, for all of us to contribute to it and to make it better so that we keep having these same tools work with each other and then make progress over time from there. I will say that I get the critiques. Like, the original implementation was like kind of these like long-lived connections between parties that could make it hard to build agents in like a distributed computing world. But they responded to that really well. So they introduced a new streamable HTTP component to the protocol that makes it possible to just run this with stateless servers. And we jumped right on that, and it's really helped us build new things. And we're also a member of the MCP steering committee with Anthropic. So they've been inviting people from throughout the industry to help like guide the evolution. And so between that, them improving the security, them responding to the feedback, I think it's got all of the support it needs to like keep moving with the industry and keep up with people building new agents.
One of the things I've noticed is there's just thousands of these MCP servers, and I guess they're like websites. There's no vetting, right? So
Yeah.
security, which ones of these are hardened? You folks are in a better position because you're connecting it to all your internal tools that
Right.
you are able to kind of vet, right? But it feels like a little bit of a wild west still.
Oh, it is. And like I will say that like if you're using it today, you should be suspicious of third parties, MCPs. You should like do some due diligence because the agents are made to connect things together, and so if there's something malicious in there, it is a problem. But I think that we're making huge progress on that front, like the community at large. So this is both adding new features to the spec in the protocol to make it more obvious when human action needs to come in. So we worked with the committee to get that integrated. So to say like, okay, this tool is about to do something that is potentially dangerous, like it should have a human review, those kinds of like concerns. But then I think most importantly is that there's going to be, I actually think that it might have launched or it will very soon. There's going to be the equivalent of like PyPy for MCP servers. So, and that's going to include a vetting process. So I think that'll help people a lot to just see like, hey, there's official places where you can go find MCP servers, and there's been a lot of due diligence around them doing the right things.
I don't know about that, man. I mean, have you pip install any Python library?
Yeah.
It installs 25 libraries you know nothing about, right? So
It's a good point. PyPy is actually, not to critique it. I get why they do what they do, but it's scary to install software from PyPy sometimes. I agree. And so I hope that this is a better version of the same idea.
So Jackie, when LLMs first came out, right? So one of the first things people tried was text to SQL for some reason.
Mhm.
And then everyone, including me, the first approach is let's fine tune. Let's fine tune for text to SQL. But then it turns out the right approach is, well, let's understand how people write SQL and then figure out how to develop a better agent, which again, I guess, boils down to what's the context, what's the table, what are the table names, and metadata, and all of these things.
Yep.
Right? So is this kind of the approach you guys took? You did you first try fine tuning your way into kind of coding tools, or did you break down the problem of coding?
Uh, as a longtime ML person, I am well versed in the bitter lesson, and so I think I've been more resistant than a lot of people to fine tuning, just based on some of the experiments we saw early on with like Bloomberg GPT and that kind of stuff, and just based on the pace at which the LLMs are evolving right now. Right, at some point, the model pace will slow down in a way that will make the fine tuning cost more worth it. But what we've seen internally is a lot of what is very similar to what you're seeing, I think, in the external MCP ecosystem, where we have, a lot of different, for example, kind of bottoms up projects that work really well for talk to the data in different domains. And a lot of those end up either pulling context from SQL query history or using a semantic layer. And so what we're doing right now is internally is very similar to what I expect will happen externally with a lot of this wider MCP system, where we're trying to take the best practices from 2 or 3 different initiatives and bundle that together in one MCP that has the best design semantic layer, the best security, and kind of the right scope for different users. One of the things I'm really excited about, having run a large data science team for a long time, is giving the people like PMs and marketers the ability to self-serve off of this. And that means that we can't just like give them access to like all of the data block. We need to make sure that we're giving them access to the right data for their questions. And so this idea of developing, data domains or data products, I think is a really interesting piece that we're exploring internally and seeing really good success with when we ask the LLM, that question in a really scoped way on top of a semantic layer.
So, Brad, I don't know if you're comfortable answering this, but what is the most interesting, I guess, feature, project, pipeline that you yourself or someone else has accomplished using codename Goose?
I think one of the recent things that I'm excited about is this like async workflow with what we're calling recipes in Goose. So
No. I mean, not Goose itself, but using Goose.
yeah, to use
Okay.
Goose. And,
Okay.
and so with so with
Also,
that feature,
someone used Goose to improve Goose.
yeah, and we're
It's a
what we
flywheel, huh?
yeah, exactly. So I do think you actually, this is part of why it's so cool to work on engineering tools, is because the tools make you faster at making the tools, and you get this like compounding effect here. But specifically, the thing that I think is really interesting is coming up with a procedure that you want to run and then have it trigger from an external action. So an example of that is like issues on GitHub. And then we can just be watching those and then trigger a whole run that's going to go try to solve that problem. Or same with like security vulnerabilities.
But then I get credit, right?
Yes, so it's the human who gets credit, which is great, of course. Get the stats up, and there's a good side to that, though, I will say, because it's never perfect, and so it's not that we open the PR immediately. It's usually that we send it we open a PR, but we put a person on it to be like, okay, you got to review this, make sure it's right, and that like human in the loop gets us to the quality we need for like a serious code base over time. But yeah, I think that like asynchronous, like have less the person having to chat through every problem with the agent and more having it act autonomously for you. That's been really cool. And so we've had good luck with that on issues, tickets, vulnerabilities, and I think we're finding more and more ways we're going to apply that.
What about you, Jackie? Are there models that were built using Goose?
We're starting to see a lot of really interesting things happening. So our team not only does all this Goose stuff, we also have like a machine learning platform where we train more traditional models that are, necessary to do things like evaluate fraud in milliseconds to check a payment. And we're starting to see a lot of really interesting ways that people are automating different parts of that training, for everything from let me type a description of this feature, and then it will, make a feature definition in this complicated Java system that I would have had trouble committing to, all the way to, I have done this end-to-end model training, and we need to think about how to make sure we document that going forward. As a financial technology company, we try to document especially a lot of our sensitive models really well, and we're able to do a lot of that in an automated way that saves a huge amount of time.
So, Brad, what's the demographic of I guess the persona of the users roughly using Goose? So I'm thinking there's people using it with notebooks and then VS Code, IDEs to the backend people who are on the terminal. So are they all using Goose at this point?
Yeah. And so I think there's two parts to the answer. One is developers, and we have developers all over the place having different amounts of success. And I think the Jupyter Notebook community, actually, we just open sourced a notebook MCP that's working great, and people are having a lot of success.
And there the UX is like a chat.
Yeah, so you're chatting to Goose, but it's filling in notebook cells, and you're training a model or doing data analysis.
What if I have an IDE?
Yes. And so the IDE people, we have a couple of integrations, but I really think that Goose is at its best when you ask it to do a longer running process, and then you come back to it and look at the diff and interact with minor tweaks in your own IDE. So those IDE people are, I still think, using their existing IDEs, but then Goose is doing something on the side, and they can see what changed and then go interact with it.
I just came across this terminal tool that you should check out, warp.dev. So basically, it's a terminal command line, but then you can interact with it like a chat interface.
Oh, okay. So
yeah. So I was wondering so it sounds like in your case, the users are interacting with a chat window that's populating a notebook separately.
That's right.
Or generating code that you can edit in your IDE.
Yeah, they're doing either this desktop app that we have, which is actually, I think, more non-developers are using that than developers, and then for the developers, we have a command line interface that kind of fits into where they're working in the terminal and all that, so it helps. But for the non-developer use cases, that they're in the chat window, that UX works great, and they're doing all kinds of things. Not even coding, of course. It's maybe they will ask it to make a website for them, then they don't even have to review the code at that point. They just get a website and they can share it with people throughout the company. Or they're working in Google Docs, so they'll be chatting with Goose. It'll be writing content to a doc or some email or things like that. So, or even posting on Slack. So all of those integrations, we're seeing people come up with real time savings outside of just vibe coding.
So one of the ways you describe Goose, Jackie, is it can help you with a project from start to finish, right? So obviously, part of that project in the past might have involved coding, but some of that might have involved other yucky stuff like, I don't know, DevOps, shell scripting, and things like that. So what exactly can Goose do for me from start to finish at this point?
Yeah, well, so I think it's only able to do something start to finish with no human intervention for pretty small tasks. We're not going to have it, running a major incident or doing a huge design. But like Brad mentioned earlier, things like vuln tickets, that's something that we can do start to finish. We're also starting to see a lot of kind of Goose pairing with a human start to finish in a process. So thinking about something like a big design system, we have tools that help, where Goose helps with the design process and, even critiquing the design process. Like someone on my team, has made personas that he can anticipate all the different design comments that are going to come from the other engineers he usually talks to. And then we're also starting to see this idea of having an SRE buddy that helps you through incidents with things like communicating back and forth. I think what really is going to get us to have those tasks be bigger and bigger scope is going to be number one, like getting better at managing the context, especially in an enterprise scale, right? Knowing, okay, we have more data than an LLM could possibly take in. How do we make sure we pluck the relevant parts of it, which is what engineers are really good at that LLMs still struggle with. And then secondly, as the foundational models get better, it should be able to handle more and more scope tasks. And that's generally what we've seen so far. Although I think in 2025, we're going to see less models improving on all benchmarks and improving on one or two benchmarks and maybe not all of them universally, which to Brad's point earlier will mean we're going to have more diversity of models as we go through some of these workflows.
So are there ways, Brad, to improve context? I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm thinking either retrieval augmented generation or knowledge graphs or something like that that doesn't necessarily mean stuffing the context window with everything.
This is like my full-time job right now, is trying to figure out. I actually think this is the like fundamental problem with LLMs that we need to get past is how can we get beyond the limit of a context window? And I'm not sure if that's going to be a new architecture, which would be great. I would love to just have someone hand me a solution to this problem. I think it could also be a lot of engineering on the side, like you're talking about. Like, when do we enrich with RAG? When do we have it navigate its own like tool calling to find things like through a graph, or even like one of the things that I found early on that I think most of the tools are doing these days is that searching the code base and telling it all the hits is worse.
There's a startup called SourceGraph, I think.
Yeah, SourceGraph. Yeah, we've talked to them a lot. They're great. And I think they're seeing like it has to be smarter than just like semantic search and throw it into the window and hope that the model figures it out. Like we found like SourceGraph's a really good idea. Things like having it use RipGrep and just do its own searches iteratively, like multi-turn searching works really well. And I think when we like as we continue to proceed, it's 100% the performance of agents, like making them feel the way humans want them to feel, where they remember things, they like have this intuition that humans develop over working on a problem for a while. That's 100% coming down to how do we put the right tokens into the context window.
So I guess, Jackie, in the context of Goose, hallucination still happens, but since you have a way to validate it anyway, so your tolerance for hallucination is higher than normal? Is that fair to say?
I mean, I think I wouldn't say it's higher than normal, as a financial tech company, especially when it comes to code that's going to like production, right? We're going to have pretty strong checks on that. But I think it's really interesting to think about, for all these different jobs that Goose could theoretically do, how easy is it to validate if it's not hallucinating, right? And in some ways, code is easier to validate than like the job of, an executive assistant. I can tell if this code runs. I can't tell if like I interpreted all these vague.
Or you don't even have to run it. In the case of SQL, you can just do explain, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that validation piece is going to end up really defining the tasks where we're able to let these agents be more autonomous versus where they're going to need more handholding, just because we don't know how to validate a lot of the things that the LLM could theoretically do, but it's prone to hallucinate on. Like, should I take this hike, given a bunch of stuff that it doesn't know?
By the way, for the coding tools, the most annoying thing is when it either suggests a library that doesn't exist or suggests something for a library that's 2 versions behind, right?
Right. Or like it just makes up a method that was never there in any version. Yeah. I think one thing that is really interesting about this is that when it makes up something like that, it actually, even if you tell it it's wrong, it's more likely to keep making things up in the same session because it's just kind of off the rails. And so we've really found that the people who have the most success with these tools are just really savage about discarding sessions that aren't getting them where they want to be. So you like start it and you're like, hey, this is not right. This is a hallucination. I figured it out through a test or something. You just start over because it's so fast. Like it can churn through so much code. You maybe do it 3 or 4 times before you get the right result, but it's still a lot faster than having written it by hand.
So this may not be a fair question given the age of the project, but what are the most interesting uses of Goose outside of Block that you've heard of?
We have a couple of partner companies that have been like contributing back to the code base and they're using it internally. It's what you would expect from the it's mostly engineers. That's where it always gets started, is the engineers are the ones who can tweak it themselves and figure it out. But I will say that like some really interesting patterns are coming up with the data side. So like having this really drive, like the engineers will start, they'll work with the data engineers to figure out like, okay, this is how you make it productive at answering people's questions. And then people can go then take that and replace their existing dashboarding systems with it. So we've seen a couple of companies outside do that. And I think that's really interesting, because it's like kind of bridging from the engineering experience into a lot of other roles at the company. And data seems to be one of the first places that happens.
So speaking of agents, obviously the buzzword right now is multi-agents, which I think is a bit of science fiction at this point, because there's a lot of things to work out with agent-to-agent communication, which I guess is another family of protocols that's distinct from MCP. So Jackie, are you folks thinking of multi-agents at some point?
Yeah, in my personal opinion, I think there's a pull to kind of abstract a little bit too soon for some of this multi-agent stuff. Like
Yeah.
I saw a lot of multi-agents where they're like, there's going to be a product manager, like an engineer and a designer. And I'm like, no, it's probably going to be weirder than that. To me, I think when we're thinking about multi-agents, we're thinking a lot more about that pattern that Brad just said. We're like, can we, have a bunch of agents do this in parallel because they have a bunch of vuln tickets, or can we, start these tasks over really quickly to get like multiple tries at it? We're not doing as much of this idea where you have super specialized agents communicating with each other. For us, we mostly see that as an advantage when you need to like split the context. And we've seen more success instead of trying to split at this point with the models that we have today. Instead of splitting the context between multiple models, for the most part, we try to summarize that context within one model. I expect that at some point, the like underlying foundational models are going to evolve such that it does make sense to do a multi-agent, but that's not something we're doing much more than experimenting with, unless Brad has an experiment that he hasn't told me about.
Yeah, so Brad, as you mentioned, so for the context-related protocols, it seems like MCP is cementing its position. On the inter-agent protocols, a bunch of announcements. I don't think anything has really emerged. So what's your sense of what's happening there?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the one that everyone knows about is A2A.
Yeah.
And I think that they were getting a lot right in the design of A2A, but then the problem right now is that we've got nobody to talk to. And it's because it's such a large barrier to entry to build like a fully functioning remote agent that someone can send a connection to over the internet. And I think it would really benefit from some of the big players in the space of making one happen. Like if there was like an agent for Google, like Gemini for Google Workspace, if that was exposed on A2A, then a smaller project like us on Goose could go talk to it and then see like, oh, if we offload some of the work to the Google agent, is that more effective than us just having a direct to Google Drive integration? Is the like agent for Google better at those specific tasks than whatever we were cooking up ourselves? And I think that's what we have to see first before those protocols take off. Is like there needs to be at least like a small collection of things that prove the concept to people. And whereas MCP, that was so easy because anyone could go make an interesting MCP in like an hour. And that really isn't the same level for A2A.
So the trendy things around the foundation models in recent months are reasoning and multimodality, right? So I guess multimodality, I can vibe code using speech at some point, using my voice.
Yeah.
Reasoning is interesting for coding, but it can get expensive, right? So how do you folks view reasoning for coding and the latency and cost, and how do you kind of balance that? And are they actually needed at all? Yeah.
I think one thing that we'll constantly tell you is that like we're going to use the most expensive things right now because we want to prove what's possible.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah.
And there's every sign that the costs are going to come down dramatically because
Yeah.
they do, right? Like the same quality that we were paying for a year ago it's 10x the quality at the same price today. And so
Yeah,
I think that,
we all win. The people building the models are losing money.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think being applied is really useful there, right? Because
Yeah.
you get to take advantage of that. But I think that the reasoners are a thing, and I think it's going to be it'll be really interesting to see what happens on the two approaches. Like, for example, it seems like Anthropic is doing less reasoner focused scaling, and OpenAI is doing more, and I'm not sure if that's going to change, but the models are good from both. But what I will say is that when we do pick between them, when we need really specific instruction following, which does come up in some of the periphery, that's really good in reasoners. And an example of that is like, okay, we want to like give you a rich UI element to show you the chart that the agent just created for you. And we need the agent to exactly fill in the right details of that chart. Reasoners are fantastic for that. Like, it's a really good trade in terms of like extra cost versus quality. And so I think there's going to be a lot of examples of that as we get more details built in the agents, where we kind of trade off between reasoning models and non-reasoning models.
So Jackie, as someone who manages people, so does this mean you're going to hire less? Your hiring has slowed down because people are a lot more productive. You can get someone to do the job of 3 people.
I think it's a lot. I think there's a lot of narrative around replacement, and I think it's a lot more about augmentation instead. You've told me that you might have been in the tech industry a long time, so you've probably seen this, movie before where we kind of move up the levels of abstraction. And so I think the job of engineers is certainly going to change, right? We all have to learn how to use these new tools. The skills that are emphasized are going to be different, but I think for those of us, who are really willing to learn and kind of figure out how the new rules of this world works, like engineering is not going away. It's really about letting engineers have more leverage by kind of going up a level of abstraction.
So Brad, how do these tools change how you interview someone?
I've been talking about like literally like I want to make an interview which is twice as hard, but say right from the get-go, here is our LLM, like log into this page and just like do this all with an LLM. It's a bit of a joke because I think today some teams need the fundamentals more than others, but I really do think that's what we have to start doing is say like, hey, in this hour, tackle a harder problem, but use ML and LLMs to do it, rather than saying like, hey, please like don't like promise me you're not going to use ChatGPT in another window as we go through this like coder pad. I think it's more about stretching and showing that the engineers that we're working with can like leverage the tools and use it to get more done.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the case with what you're seeing, Jackie. What I'm seeing is that the young developers are really open to these tools. The senior developers are also open. The people in between are the most resistant somehow. They're the most skeptical. And the problem is, as you mentioned, it's not that the engineering job is going to go away. The engineering job that's going to go away is the engineer that doesn't want to use these tools, right? So,
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of different peers at different companies, and I would say everyone's kind of seen a different distribution of resistance to some of these technologies for sure. And I think you're exactly right that it's all about who can kind of overcome this feeling of being threatened by these new technologies and kind of put their ego aside and accept that we're all beginners here, right? Nobody knows what the best practices are for doing this. And I think, that's really exciting to junior engineers because they feel like they can, kind of be on the forefront with everybody else. And it's also really familiar to senior engineers who have been through some of these paradigm shifts before. And there's certainly, certain pockets that we're seeing that are really identified, like my identity is a Ruby developer. I think that's less about AI generally and more just about how quickly tech changes. It always becomes challenging if you over-identify with any one technical skill, because it's just that this time things are changing faster than they have before.
So Brad, at this point, what percentage of your coding is 100% vibe coding? The reason I asked is the other day, right? So I had to write this crawler, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I can spend a day doing this, or let me see if I can vibe code. And I did it in half an hour.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's the best code, but it crawled the thing that I needed to crawl, right? So
There's so I completely agree. There's so many problems where it's kind of got that quality of if it works, it works. Like
it's
it's
a
not everything.
one-off. It's a one-off thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's like who needs to maintain this? It just did its job. I'm done. And in those cases, I try to vibe code everything. So any like a one-off, like if I want to build and share a dashboard or a data visualization, that's 100% vibe coded. Um, and then I think when we get into like maintaining a code base over time, what I try to shoot for is like 90% lines of code are AI generated, and then I do the last 10% to make sure it's good. And I think that's a good trade-off now, both because I like want to work on the tools and like just make sure that the tools are high quality, like the AI tools. So it's a good way for me to just get practice using Goose while I write Goose. But also I think that's the future, right? Because the volume stuff, like it's going to be less about that every line of code is exactly perfect, exactly what you want it to do, and more that you have units of code that do the right thing and are tested, and you kind of think of them almost as these like workable components that you build a bigger code base out of. And then that's a skill I think we all need to go figure out now.
What I want is a foundation model for coding that is built on code written by Sanjay Gemawat, Jeff Dean, and all these gods, right? So I don't want all this crap on GitHub. Uh, is there are you folks factoring that in? So, for example, at Block, obviously you've got this superstar 10x, 100x coders, right? So, should their code be recognized by the model more than the average coder?
I think that's a tricky question, and we're not doing a lot to, directly do that right now. But I think to me, when you talk about all these really senior engineers, part of it is their code, but I think even more of it is their ability to filter through context. And so that's, I think, an angle we're really interested in trying to develop that like senior engineer view in, is how do we bring context into this model to make sure that they understand the problem right, and then writing, the code that solves the right problem is almost like
Just have some sort of monitor on Brad's keyboard so that you can follow everything that Brad is doing, uh, and then improve your model that way. So, Brad, you mentioned this flywheel, which also seems to be something that the foundation model builders have in mind, right? So, if their foundation model gets better, then it'll help them build better models and better discover new architectures, and it gets better and better. So it sounds like that's the path you're on as well.
Yeah, and I think I definitely agree with that metaphor of like, okay, these foundation models are helping people write better training code. They're also helping people generate better training data. And that's gonna, like if that actually works the way we hope it does, that's an exponential curve. And then we do the same thing on the development side, where we're making AI tools that make us better developers, and then we use those to develop better AI tools. And that's part of why we're so interested in being kind of the core of what we're building with something like Goose is developer focused, and we're using that to speed ourselves up. But then every time we make a big improvement, that those side effects from the developer loop, we bring those to other people at the company too. And we want to make sure that we're kind of doing both. So we're like accelerating ourselves, running that flywheel. And then every time we get to a new tier of quality, we like make sure that it works for everybody throughout the company.
So, what's the goal for growing Goose? Obviously, I'll help you folks with my newsletter and podcast, but is the plan to hire a DevRel person or someone an evangelist to actually kind of really grow the project, because it's not central to the business of Block in many ways, right? So.
Yeah, we already have actually an open source developer relations team that helps a little bit with this, both externally and to some degree internally. We are doing so, and they organize a lot of meetups and that kind of stuff. We're really focused on trying to make sure that this reaches, the best helps people solve the problems it's right for versus, trying to like push it in and of itself. But we're also seeing, because of, this emphasis on local and open source, that a lot of where the growth is coming is from word of mouth and some of these hobbyist communities that all really want to, code fully locally and that sort of stuff, and are really passionate about open source versus, some of the more commercial spaces that have different values.
And so, Brad, what's on the near-term roadmap? 6 to 12 months.
Oh, 6 to 12 months is that
long.
feels like forever. Yeah. I wish I could plan 12 months in advance right now. No, I think there's a couple of things coming, and one of them is a design overhaul of the experience in Goose. And I think that the first version has a bit of a design by engineers feel, and I think we did a great job with it, to be fair. Like, and we got a lot of like tweaks and improvements, but we now have some people looking at it who really are thinking about the way that people interact with the AI agents, and kind of coming up with a novel interface for that we're excited about.
Yeah. I mean, the way you describe it right now, there's still some context switching, right? So I'm on a chat and then I have to go to my notebook.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So, yeah.
That you don't want to leave the tool, right? Because it works best if you're in it and you have a like kind of constructive flow there. And so that's something we're working on very actively. And the other thing is we're looking at figuring out how to take the same thing we learned about our internal productivity and bring it to products at the company. So like Block has several different places where we think AI could be a huge accelerant to the way that people run their small business or the way they manage their finances. And so we're going to look at how we can integrate that same like AI agentic autonomous flow into the other products that the company builds.
So where do RAG and knowledge graphs fall in that in your roadmap?
I think of them as little components of how we make the agent perform well. And an example of that came up for us is internally, people have around 40 or 50 MCP servers connected to a typical Goose session. That's like a couple hundred tools, and the current models can't handle it. And so we've actually used like RAG to specifically just tell the agent like which tools are relevant to the thing that the human's asking about right now. And that actually performs fantastically. So I think that's going to be rolling out in the next major Goose release. So those kinds of details of like, you don't necessarily see it much as a person using the agent, but it's just under the hood powering it doing the right thing and knowing about the context you needed to know about.
So you should add a feature for Jackie's team, which is it'll scour archive or something to figure out what's the latest and greatest in terms of eval or whatever important topic that they're interested in, instead of them having to read all these papers themselves. Speaking of which, eval. How do you do eval for this?
Gently, like most of our competitors. I think it's almost a trap to rely on benchmarks too much, because so much of the capabilities of these models are, not well captured by something like SweBench, right? SweBench doesn't tell you what it's really like to use this as your daily driver. And so we do a combination of like quantitative and qualitative evals, and we're kind of developing out what those quantitative evaluations look like. In some areas it works better, unit tests, or like I have a set of policies that I can make sure that this particular agent conforms to. But we're trying not to rush ahead to rely too quickly on some of these benchmarks that I think we've seen don't always correspond to the kind of lived experience of using the model.
So one of the problems with a tool like Goose is it makes me so productive, but I work in a regulated industry like financial services. So suddenly I'm pumping out all this code and models and data pipelines, but then you've got this legal and compliance people who are just slowing everything down. So what's the point of all these tools if their tools are not keeping up, right?
I think we're actually seeing a lot of adoption of AI tools, especially among non-engineers that have to do a lot of this boilerplate work. They're, pretty much universally enthusiastic about the ability to do something like automate responses to some of these, forms that they have to fill out. And as a financial company, I think it's almost an asset that we have a lot of these controls in place that maybe we didn't, choose to put there. But now that we're able to kind of move in this faster way, it's great to have those constraints around our different processes to make sure that we have that extra validation as we try to find more and more ways to automate.
And in closing, Brad, obviously we talk a lot about development, which is, pushing things out, deploying them to production, right? So, but once in production, obviously we all know things will break. You'll have incidents. But one of the things that that's interesting is very few teams I talk to have any sort of AI incident response plan, right? So maybe they have for security by this point, right? But for AI incidents, no one even has a definition of what will we consider an AI incident, right? So in your case, you're pushing, you're getting people to move faster, so they're pushing things faster and faster out, but there's no, what are the tools for helping them cope with inevitable incidents?
Yeah, I think of the role of AI is so like you're saying, like we make more changes, which means that there's more room for outages. And so what we have to do to complement that is bring our like time to response down as much as possible. Like we're talking like we want that to be
time to recovery, TTR.
Yeah, time to recovery, exactly. So like what if our time to recovery was 2 or 3 minutes? And I think that the way that we get there is there's so many manual parts to the process of recovery where first it's detecting an outage, which we can do. We can have AI help with, like literally just reading logs. And then once you know that something is broken, you have to find a root cause so that you can fix it. And that's literally an exercise in reading dozens of sources, and it's a lot of volume. And that's something that LLMs are fantastic at. So we've actually got the first implementations of things that do literally this, which is like, okay, this service is down. I'm going to read all of the system logs from the last hour in parallel across multiple LLMs, and I'm going to raise that to the human. And this is just a huge speed up. This is, I think it has potential for, unlike code where you can get like maybe like 5x faster on the right problems. This is like you can get 100x faster because you just have so much data volume to read through. So I think there's massive opportunities in time to recovery.
And with that, listeners, you can find this project at block.github.io/goose. And thank you, Brad and Jackie.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.